In a quiet neighborhood where every rule seemed designed to control rather than protect, a storm of pettiness turned into a full-scale confrontation. When my elderly aunt was locked outside in a torrential downpour by an overzealous HOA president, no one expected the night to end with shattered gates, riot gear, and a revelation that would shake the entire community. Stay with me, because what began as small-town control spiraled into an unforgettable moment of justice and reckoning. Before we dive into this unbelievable story of HOA power gone wrong and the lengths I went to protect my family, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss how this confrontation unraveled and what happened next. The night had begun like any other stormy evening. Rain hammered against the roofs of identical houses, slicking the manicured lawns and glistening off the blacktop streets. My aunt, frail but stubbornly independent, had returned from her doctor's appointment only to find the main community gate bolted shut. She stood shivering beneath her umbrella, which was quickly torn apart by the wind her coat soaked through. Inside the guardhouse, the HOA president, a middle-aged woman notorious for her strictness, watched with satisfaction as the gate remained closed. She had been looking for a reason to make an example out of someone, and my aunt had unknowingly given her that moment. Neighbors peered from their windows but kept their lights low, not daring to interfere. The rain intensified, puddles pooling at my aunt's feet as she tried to shelter herself under the small overhang of the gate's awning. Minutes stretched into an hour and the cold began to sap her strength. When my phone rang and I heard her trembling voice on the other end, something inside me snapped. The image of her alone in that storm burned into my mind, and I knew this was no longer just an HOA dispute, but a matter of dignity and safety. As I pulled on my heavy gear and prepared to head out, memories of past discipline and training flickered back. I had once worn a uniform for my country. Tonight I would wear a different kind of armor for my family. The drive to the community was a blur of flashing hazard lights and windshield wipers at full speed. Each gust of wind against my vehicle fueled my resolve. By the time I arrived at the gates, the storm had become a wall of water. My aunt's figure was barely visible, slumped against the cold iron bars. The HOA president, dry under her umbrella, held a clipboard and smirked as she scribbled notes, unaware that I was approaching. My boots splashed into deep puddles as I stepped out of the car, the weight of my protective gear making each stride deliberate. The memory of every unfair fine and petty letter this woman had sent came rushing back, but it wasn't anger that moved me. It was the sight of my aunt's pale, shivering face pressed against the bars. The neighborhood security camera panned slowly, capturing every moment like a silent witness. Somewhere inside the clubhouse, residents whispered, watching the monitors. Some hoped for a confrontation. Others prayed for peace. I walked up to the gate, rain cascading down my helmet, and saw the HOA president's smirk falter for the first time. She had expected compliance, not confrontation. Inside the gate, the HOA president fumbled with her keys but made no move to open the lock. She barked orders at someone on her phone, perhaps calling backup or even the police, but I had no time to wait. My aunt's health was deteriorating before my eyes. In that instant, the years I had spent enforcing order for others converged with my duty to protect my own. The metal gate loomed between us, its decorative spikes glistening in the rain. I planted my boots, squared my shoulders, and assessed the hinges and lock with the precision of someone who had breached barriers before. The storm roared, wind whipping my coat as the HOA president's voice rose to a shrill protest, but I shut out the noise. All that mattered was my aunt on the other side, and the knowledge that no amount of petty authority justified what was happening. With a single decisive motion, I shifted my weight, braced myself, and drove my shoulder into the weak point of the gate. The sound was deafening, a screech of twisting metal and cracking wood as the barrier gave way under force it was never meant to withstand. The gate swung inward violently, the lock snapping, and water splashed across the sidewalk like a wave. My aunt stumbled forward into my arms, her body trembling from cold and fear but relieved beyond words. Gasps echoed from nearby windows as neighbors saw the symbol of HOA control literally broken open. The HOA president stood frozen, her clipboard clattering to the ground, her mouth forming a scream that was swallowed by the thunder. She had never imagined her authority could be challenged, much less shattered in full view of the community. As I guided my aunt toward my car, the president recovered enough to shout into her phone, summoning reinforcements. But the narrative had already shifted. Residents emerged from their houses, some with umbrellas, others just in raincoats drawn by the commotion. Their expressions ranged from shock to admiration, and for the first time, the HOA president's grip on their fear loosened. The storm became a backdrop for something larger, a neighborhood waking up to the abuse of power it had tolerated for too long. As the rain began to ease, flashing lights appeared at the end of the street, patrol cars responding to a call about a disturbance at the gate. The HOA president straightened her blazer and tried to compose herself, but the scene she faced was not the one she had hoped for. Residents crowded closer, murmuring about the injustice they had just witnessed. My aunt, wrapped in a blanket someone had brought, sat in my car sipping hot tea from a thermos. I stood nearby, still in my gear, watching as the officer stepped out and took in the bent gate, the terrified but defiant HOA president, and the silent ring of neighbors. They listened to her accusations, then turned to me for my side of the story. My words were calm but firm, each detail laying bare the pettiness and cruelty that had led to this moment. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions softening as they looked toward my aunt. In that instant, the balance of power shifted decisively. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Footage from the security cameras leaked online, turning the incident into a viral moment. People across the country weighed in, debating homeowner rights and the limits of HOA authority. News vans appeared at the community entrance, their reporters eager to interview residents. The HOA president tried to spin the story, painting herself as the victim of an unprovoked attack, but the evidence told another tale. Her reputation crumbled as residents recounted years of fines, harassment, and intimidation. Petitions circulated demanding her resignation. Meetings once held in sterile rooms under her watchful eye became impassioned gatherings where people spoke freely. My aunt recovered slowly, bolstered by the kindness of neighbors who had once feared retaliation but now offered support openly. I kept a low profile, letting the community find its own voice, but every time I walked by the repaired gate, I felt the weight of that night and the change it had set in motion. By the time the next HOA election arrived, the outcome was inevitable. The president was voted out, replaced by a board of neighbors committed to fairness and transparency. Rules were revised, fines reduced, and the once impenetrable gate now stood open longer, welcoming residents instead of trapping them. My aunt became something of a local figure, invited to speak at meetings as a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. I returned my gear to storage, content that it would not be needed again. Yet even as life settled, the memory of that storm and the scream that marked the end of unchecked authority lingered, a cautionary tale etched into the fabric of the neighborhood. People still whispered about it at block parties and online forums, not with fear but with a sense of pride that they had witnessed the turning of the tide. And so, from one night of rain and confrontation, emerged a community's awakening. It wasn't the riot gear or the broken gate that truly changed things. It was the realization that silence in the face of petty tyranny only feeds it. The storm had passed, but its echoes remained as a promise that no one in that neighborhood would stand alone again. This story of my aunt, the HOA president, and the night control turned to chaos became more than a viral video. It became a reminder of how easily power can be abused and how necessary it is to stand up, even when it means stepping into the rain. If you found this story gripping and want more unbelievable real-life HOA and neighborhood dramas, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and click the bell so you won't miss the next one. Your support helps us keep bringing these stories to life.